goals. One such promotion was Karen Andrews, who is now Assistant Minister for Science, and she joins me from our Brisbane studio. Karen Andrews, thanks very much for joining us.
It's a pleasure. Hello, Helen.
Now, before we get into some of the heavier issues, such a great weekend of footy for many fans, but particularly for Queensland. Now, even though you may not be a natural North Queensland Cowboys fan, as you are the MP for the Gold Coast, what did you think of the fairy tale coming true, essentially, for the Cowboys in the NRL Grand Final?
Well, I grew up in Townsville, so I'm a big Cowboys supporter.
You must be overjoyed.
Absolutely. So last night I had the option of watching, going to the movies and watching The Martian, which I'm keen to see, or watching the football. So I stayed home, watched the football. I was on the edge of my seat. It was a brilliant game.
So it was a very well-deserved one, wasn't it? Even though there were quite a few narky comments today, particularly from their opposite numbers coach, Wayne Bennett.
Well, I think it was a great game. I think both teams played particularly well. I'm a Cowboys supporter. I was on the edge of my seat when Thurston kicked and hit the goalpost. I screamed along with tens of thousands of people around the country. I couldn't believe that we'd got that close. Look, I think it was a great game, and let's look at the positives. And look, I understand there'll be a lot of disappointment, but it was a great game. I think it was well played and good on the Cowboys.
Does it actually help North Queensland? There's been a lot of talk about that today, or is it just it will help in these few days, but really nothing much will change?
I think it's a bright spark for them. I think it'll give them a little bit more confidence. They'll be happy. I think it's a big positive. They love their football team, and they will just be delighted that they brought home the cup. I mean, good on them. And yes, I think it will be a big positive, particularly in the short term. Look, I hope the euphoria lasts.
Now, you were recently appointed Assistant Minister for Science by Malcolm Turnbull. Can you explain why we appear now to have two science ministers? Christopher Pyne, who I think is your senior minister, he's listed as Industry, Innovation and Science, but Mal Brough is also listed as Minister for Defence Material and Science. Now, you are Assistant Science Minister. Why do we need so many ministers for science?
Well, clearly science is something that impacts certainly on all of industry, and hence the role for Christopher Pyne as the Minister for Industry, Innovation and Science. But science is a big part of our defence forces as well, so hence the role for Mal Brough. Now, can I say that science was always a part of defence as well too, so when Stuart Robert was the Assistant Minister, he had responsibility for science within the defence forces as well. I think it's great that there's so many people involved in science and promoting science, and I will be happy to work with both Minister Brough and Minister Pyne as required.
So what are your science priorities? What do you really want to push? What do we need to push?
Well, I'm in the process of working on our science policy. Not alone, there will be many other people that will input into the science policy, and we're looking 10 years into the future. So we are looking at a long-term vision for science in Australia. We have consulted very broadly over the last 12 months in particular, and the science priorities, there are many, but some key ones are certainly looking at certainty of funding. Scientists talk to me regularly about the issues with funding and making sure that it is for the longer term, and I'm very supportive of that.
Well, on that score, are you going to restore the funding cuts that were made to the CSIRO, which is our chief science innovation body?
Well, there is $3 billion in funding over the forward estimates for CSIRO, and the government has provided $9.7 billion of funding to science across a number of departments as well. So that's a significant sum of money. I understand clearly that there have been some changes to the funding arrangements for CSIRO, but I'm very keen to make sure that industry engages with our researchers, and I think there's a very strong role for industry to take more of a leadership role and certainly support our research organisations, and CSIRO would be pretty high up on that list.
So is that by way of saying you want industry to restore those cuts that the government has taken out of CSIRO?
Industry certainly has a part to play with that. It was an efficiency dividend for CSIRO, so in the order of about 2%. And there would be, quite frankly, many businesses out there that would be very pleased if they only had to deal with a 2% efficiency dividend. Our small businesses have been hit quite hard over recent years. So it was about a 2% efficiency dividend for CSIRO. I'm saying that I believe there is a role for stronger engagement between CSIRO and industry, and that industry, I'm hoping, will get behind CSIRO and support it.
All right, well, you also want to get more people in general into STEM, but you want to encourage more women into STEM, science, technology, engineering, maths. How are you going to do that?
Yeah, look, that's a good question. Can I just start with some statistics, because it indicates that we do have a significant problem with the number of people that are taking up STEM subjects, their science and maths subjects, particularly at school, and moving into STEM careers. If you actually compare the number of Year 12 students in 1992 to 2012, so over about a 20-year period, there are 30,800 more Year 12 students. But there have been decreases in the science-based subjects. So there are 8,000 less studying physics, 4,000 less studying chemistry, and 12,000 less studying biology.
Right, but so how are you going to get them into those subjects? How are you going to encourage them?
Yes. We know that there are some key areas that we need to be working in. Firstly, with the years 5 to 8s, because they're not engaged at that stage. That is the time that they are going to leave. Now, we need to engage with several groups of people to increase the awareness, particularly of the role for STEM in future jobs. We need to be engaging with the parents, and we have some citizen science initiatives which we believe will help with that. We need to engage with the teachers, and we will be putting in place some strategies to assist science teachers to develop their skills, and for many to have greater confidence in teaching the science subjects. And we'll also be working with the principals as well, so that they can help develop their teachers. So these are some of the things that we will be focusing on in our science policy, and they are very, very important to Australia's future.
Karen Andrews, I want to sort of change the subject to the community really has been rocked by another lone wolf terror-related shooting in Sydney. I guess the big question for all governments is how to put in place effective strategies for de-radicalisation, given that policing and security agencies seem to be admitting that they cannot possibly find out about and track 15-year-old boys who don't have any track records. There are going to have to be more programs in place to stop the radicalisation.
But the event in Parramatta on Friday was just absolutely horrific. So our thoughts and prayers are certainly with the family of Curtis Chang. It was just horrific. Now, the Prime Minister's made it very clear, and I absolutely support his view, that families in particular are in the front line in terms of being able to identify if there are changes with some of these kids. Now, it's frightening, it's shocking that the perpetrator of Friday's shooting was 15 years old. So the Prime Minister has been quick to talk to the community leaders, but he is saying very clearly we need to be working with the families and helping them to identify changes in the children, because they are in daily contact with these young teenagers.
All right, but is there more that governments can do? We have seen under the previous Abbott government, we saw a lot of anti-terror laws put in place, and yes, we could argue all night about whether they're working, but before those sorts of laws, they wouldn't even have an impact on helping authorities detect this young boy. So what sort of programs are you putting in place in schools and communities to help de-radicalise, or are you putting it all on the families to track changes in their young folk?
No, not at all. We actually do have a program which has just gone online, which will actually assist people to identify the signs of radicalisation and indicate what they should be doing. Now, you can go online and have a look at that at livingsafetogether.gov.au. So these brochures will start a national conversation, I believe, with how to identify what those signs of radicalisation are and what you should do. Of course, if you see an imminent threat.
Yeah, but that may be good again to help families identify somebody who's been radicalised. What about trying to get to the 12, 13, 14, 15-year-olds through school programs so that you can counter what they're thinking?
Yes, well certainly the documentation that I've just referred to is specifically targeted at schools. So we will be working with schools to assist them in identifying the signs so that they know what to look for and then what steps they need to take if they are concerned about changes in behaviour of any of the students.
All right, so you believe those sorts of strategies, you're doing enough? Because we understand for quite a long time now in the UK there have been quite a few de-radicalisation strategies put in place that have been relatively effective. Is your government trying to look at implementing some of those?
We will of course look at a range of different strategies. Now there is an ongoing investigation in relation to Friday's incident, and there will be more information that comes out in the fullness of time that will assist in our deliberations as to what may be the next step. I think it's important that we take on board the advice that we're given from the relevant authorities, and we look at what our procedures and processes are and look at modifying them when necessary and as appropriate. And of course we will be looking at what is happening overseas to see what we can learn and implement in Australia.
I just want to ask you briefly about your government under new Minister Simon Birmingham announced the shelving of the higher education changes to deregulate university fees and cut their course funding, which failed to get support under former Minister Chris Pyne. So is it now back to the drawing board to still try and get some fee deregulation through?
We certainly have to look at how we're going to have a sustainable higher education system in Australia. I absolutely support what Minister Birmingham has done. You know, we had faced a Senate that had not passed the legislation that we had proposed. We needed to give certainty to the higher education sector, so we needed to come out and say to them there will be no changes to current funding arrangements going into 2016. That gives Minister Birmingham the opportunity to talk to higher ed providers, to students and also to his Senate colleagues about the issues that need to be addressed to make sure that we have a sustainable and a fair higher education system into the future.
Karen Andrews, congratulations on your promotion and thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure, Helen.